it was to northern Brazil, and just south of Suriname, the country of Suriname, and on a tributary of the Amazon. And it was awesome, man. It was 7 days fishing, and the main target was peacock bass on the fly, which crazy strong fish, especially that might be one of the strongest freshwater fish and hardest fighting freshwater fish that I've come across. Like, they are like, holy cow, man. Funny enough, I'm trying to remember now. I think I broke 2 or 3 rods on that trip. From fish, like, yes. And I think I replaced them, but I'm trying to remember now. But like, going under the boat, one of them snapped, and I forget how I broke the other ones, but super strong, crazy strong fish.
This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview conservationists, hunters, anglers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the greatest stories, information, and advice from the best in the world.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, our special guest is Will Collins. He is the host of the Buffalo Roamer podcast. He's also one hell of an adventurer, explorer, and fisherman. He's been all over the world doing all of those things. He's canoed the Yukon River. He's canoed the Mississippi River. He's backpacked the Brooks Range. He's fly fished all over the world, South America, the Italian Alps. He's got quite the resume. He also lives here in the Midwest where I live. He's obsessed with smallmouth fishing. We talk about walleye fishing. We talk about fly fishing for peacock bass, trout, you name it. He's done all this stuff. Plus, he's rafted the entire Grand Canyon. There's not a lot he hasn't done, so no more needs to be said about the one and only Buffalo Roamer, Will Collins. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. I'm a huge fanatic for handmade, high-quality leather and canvas products. In my opinion, they last longer, hold up better to the abuses of travel, and honestly, they just look really cool. That's why I use Badger Claw Outfitters. They've been making handcrafted products for hunting, camping, and travel since 2011, and that's right up my alley. Best part is they're made right here in the USA and are guaranteed for life. They've got everything from gun leather, belts, custom knife sheaths, wallets, duffel bags, leather and canvas pouches, everyday carry items, and more. Badger Claw Outfitters, made in the USA, built for the wild. Will, so you are quite the explorer, quite the angler. You are very proficient and well-versed in both worlds. So that the fact that we both have some exploration experience, we both have some fishing experience, I think this will be a pretty interesting conversation. So let's start with fishing. Because I love, dude, it's that time of year. It's like fishing central now. Early spring, time to get after. The spawn's going to happen soon. It's like pure walleye season. So let's start with walleye. That's something we both have in common, is the fish regionally to us is walleye. So what's your opinion on walleye fishing? Unbiased, good or bad?
Here we go. We're diving right in.
Right, I want to know.
We're diving
I have
right
opinions.
Heavy hitters. Okay, here we go. The walleye opinion. I'll take the roundabout way here because we got time. I love fishing, man. I love fishing too. Runs in my blood. Yeah. It's like working out for some people, or I don't know, whatever that thing is for somebody. If I don't get out and go fishing once a week when the weather's nice, or at least once every other week, God forbid, I just don't feel right. Yes. But walleye, okay. I have a love-hate relationship. I don't want to say hate, but I love catching walleye. I love eating walleye. However, I don't pursue walleye hardly anymore, and I much prefer smallmouth. Because, you catch a walleye and you drag them across the top of the water like a Limp Biscuit, you can, some of the hogs will take you and drag some line, but the fight is nothing like pound for pound like a smallmouth is. Now, with that being said, I love walleye fishing, and I've caught walleye all kinds of ways. When I was I live in northern Illinois now, is where I'm at, and I lived in South Dakota for 3 years, and that was walleye fishing heaven for me, at least. Man, it was just, they're everywhere, big, plentiful, and that was kind of the name of the game up there, was walleye fishing. And so, yeah, I got proficient in walleye fishing then, but, catching them all kinds of ways. But I guess that's my kind of rundown on walleye. I love catching them. I love eating them. It's one of the fish that if I'm catching walleye, I usually try and take a limit. But I would rather spend a day smallmouth fishing if I had to.
Yeah, I would pretty much have the exact same sentiment on walleye. Being from the Great Lakes, especially Lake Erie, you have to like walleye fishing because that's what we have around here. And I love going out on the boat and bullshitting with my friends and just sitting out on the water all day on Lake Erie. I think one time I've ever gone out, we haven't come home with a limit, and it's awesome. Fishing with guys on Lake Erie is awesome because they always have a ton of fish and you always go home with fish, which I love.
Sounds great.
Eating them. But yeah, they are really not that fun to fight. They are just like a limp sock, a wet sock dragging up. And if you are fishing for the thrill of the fight and the hope of the fish snapping your line off potentially and fighting that fish to the end of time, not the fish for you. So we're both on the same page there. So this will be a good podcast. So I know
totally
you're basically the first thing you see when you go onto your website is you holding a giant smallmouth. So what's the appeal of smallmouth, and then what is your best tactics for smallmouth fishing? Because I've yet to catch a smallmouth. I want to go after them this year, but I've never caught one. Go. Yeah.
All right. Talking my language. Okay. So the appeal of smallmouth, and I'll preface this by saying that, I just love to fish every species. I consider myself, and I try to strive to be an all around angler. I love to fly fish. I was in the West. I went to college in Colorado and bounced around the West for 10 years before South Dakota, or I guess not quite 10 years, but a while, before South Dakota, and then moving back to Illinois here. And so I love to fly fish. I fish for muskie, all kinds of stuff. But in my mind, you have to be an all around angler and be able to use different tactics for the species you're fishing for. And smallmouth in particular, I love them because they're just pretty, man. They're pretty fish. Yeah. They are underrated pretty, I think. They have kind of, not spots, but like the dark markings on the side with the green colors, and they can change depending on what body of water they're in, how clear. I'm sure the ones around Lake Erie are like at least at Lake Michigan here, they're like almost iridescent. And then if you get them in some of the rivers, they're real dark. So I love that, but I love where they live in rivers and lakes, and they're fighters, man. They're pound for pound, they don't get massive, but, if you get anywhere from like a 15 to a 20-inch, smallmouth, like you're in for a ride. It's going to be jumping. It's like, they're the best. And then, it's a strong fight. So they'll jump, they'll run. And then I love fishing topwater. I mean, topwater fishing for smallmouth is like, doesn't get much better than watching a fish just explode on the surface and just crush something,
Yeah, absolutely. I just got into fly fishing within the last 6 months, probably even less than that, probably closer to like 4 or 3. And actually this weekend, me and my buddies are going up to northern Michigan up on the Pine River to try and catch some trout. No
Sweet.
idea what we're doing, but it's going to be fun as hell. That's the adventure
awesome.
in it. Like, that's something I think you learn doing some of the long distance stuff like you've done and I've done to a much lesser extent. You've done some seriously big trips, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But I think you just learn that not to be scared to just go try weird shit. And like, it doesn't really matter what the outcome is as long as you've learned something or got something out of it or just explored a new place. So that's that's my take on it. Like, even if we'll probably catch some fish between 5 people, you have to catch at least one, hopefully. It's during their spawning season.
To, but yeah, I hope so.
You should, at least. I hope. With enough people throwing enough different flies, somebody's got to catch something, even if it's a bluegill. I don't really care. But when you go out to fish, you've caught everything. You've caught a lot of bucket list fish for a lot of people: sailfish, muskie, permit, peacock bass are super cool, grayling, like all this stuff. What's a fish that you've yet to catch that's really like top notch bucket list that you're like, you got to get? Because you've already done good majority of them for a lot of people.
Yeah, I've caught a lot of fish. If you're interested, my website's Buffalo Roamer. I think I have a list on there of some of the most of the fish I've caught, or at least some of the crazy ones. Well, a lot of things there, but as far as species that I'd like to catch, and quickly for the don't let me forget about the species, but for the fly fishing for your trip up there, I totally agree, and I think that's the best thing about fishing different ways. Like most of the time, I'm probably like 80% spin fishing now, just because what I'm doing, where I'm at and the rivers I'm fishing, but it's all about learning, it's like in order to get better, you can't be afraid to be like, hey, I suck at fly fishing, but my buddies and I are going to go up and we're going to learn and try and figure it out, and that's the only way you get better. And I've found at least that, the more humble you are in saying how much you suck at something, or like how much of a beginner you are, the more people are willing to help and show you too, rather than like pretending that you're like this expert fly fisherman. It's like, no, we're just kind of picking this up and we're having a great time and we're trying to learn what we can. And that's the only way that you can pick it up and get better with things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. We bought some shitty fly rods and we're going to go give her hell and see what happens. That's the best thing you can do most of the time. And then you get better from there if you stick with it. That's my opinion anyway.
Exactly. And then the next time you go, you know more, and hopefully we'll have better success.
Yep.
But fish that I want to catch, I got a few of them, and I have a list in my phone, too, of fish that I like, trips that I would love to do. But a couple that come to the top of the mind is, sturgeon. I forget what it is. I think it's like white sturgeon or something, but they have these giant sturgeon in like BC, and in some other places. I think British Columbia is one of the most, I believe it's the Fraser River. It's like spectacular scenery, and you get like these, I don't even know how big they are. They can be like, 6 to 8 foot, massive. I believe they're white sturgeon is what they are. So that would be sick. I think you troll for them, which is what it is. I'm not a huge fan of trolling, but just to be able to have one of those on the end of the line would be wild, and they like jump too. So that'd be crazy. And then what else? I'd also like to get a alligator gar down in Texas.
Mm-hmm. Huge.
My brother. Yeah. Crazy. My brother lives in Fort Worth, outside of Fort Worth, and they have the Trinity River down there, that's known for alligator gar. And I saw one of the captains that I was talking to, actually, I wanted to line up a trip with him, a guided trip. I didn't, it ended up falling through last time I was down there visiting my brother, but I saw just recently that he broke like the world record for catch and release, alligator gar. And they estimated that the fish was, about 100 years old.
Yeah.
And it was like, I want to say it was somewhere around 6 feet or something. Just crazy, and crazy sharp razors. You've seen those things, right?
Oh yeah. So I hate talking out of my ass, because sometimes I get the facts wrong. So people will check me if I'm wrong, but I believe a lot of people down there will catch them and just like throw them on shore and kill them. And I don't know why that is, but like, I don't know. I'm a conservationist first and a fisherman second. And I absolutely hate that shit. But I mean, people always do dumb shit when it comes to fishing and hunting and all that stuff. So that's really frustrating. But I heard alligator gar, if you keep them, taste amazing. I heard they're just like astoundingly good fish to eat.
Yeah, I believe it. And all those things are true. And like rough fish or trash fish, I guess other people call them. I might be having some issues with my internet here, but let me know if we have problems. People, more and more I've gotten into like snakehead, bowfin, what else? Just fish, carp. There's a bunch of, I'm sure in your area too, probably. There's red horse, which are like a type of sucker, that are considered, they're not considered game fish, but dude, you want to get a reel spinning, and you can sight fish for them. They're like kind of golden in the rivers. They're freaking awesome. And so I've kind of been into that stuff a lot recently too. These overlooked fish that I didn't even really learn about until like the last handful of years. I have a good buddy and like a fishing mentor of mine who we go out with, and he's a nature boy, is what he calls himself. And so like
Ric Flair.
Yeah, exactly. Woo. No, but he knows like every species of fish, all the birds and stuff. But I'll ask him like, catch a random fish, like, well, what is that thing? He's like, oh, that's a smallmouth buffalo. Or, whatever. And, so I've been into chasing some of those rough fish too, and like trying to ID them and figure out what the different species of carp and red horse and sucker and all that kind of stuff is. That's kind of fun.
I love that mentality. I am like the anti, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the anti-snob fisherman. Like I just want to catch
me too.
Fish, man. Like people put these limitations on everything, and it's just so stupid. I think it's like,
I agree.
I recently,
walleye fishermen are bad with that, as are fly fishermen.
Everyone's bad about it. It's like, dude, and I will say this forever. I love eating fish. I love walleye. I love eating tuna. I love eating any kind of fish that's edible. And some of the most expensive, beautiful, $1,000 a person trips for these fish that people love, I would still rather go out and catch a couple limits of bluegill and eat those and perch any day of the week. I literally could not have a better time and a fish to eat than bluegill and perch. I literally love them. And people just are like, that's not a thing a lot of people do anymore, because they're like, oh, bluegill, those are for kids. Like, dude, I'll take your kids fishing. They catch all the bluegill they want and give them to me. I'll eat the shit out of those.
I hear you. I do love bluegill, and I do like, especially it's funny. It's funny how bluegill, right? It's a small fish, but even when you get like a big bluegill, it's a small fish. But a big small fish, it's like you can appreciate like a slab bluegill. It's like colored up, and you can just tell, like, hold it. I'm looking at my hand, just thinking of like a bluegill, taking out my hand, like holding it, looking at it, like that's a big bluegill. Like there's nothing wrong with that,
No, and throw the cool thing about fly fishing for bluegill is you can throw the shittiest, cheapest fly that they make, and they will just hammer it. And I'm thinking about getting like a 3-weight just for bluegill, because it would feel like fighting a huge largemouth on that. They fight. I love catching. But anyway, Trash Fish Tour 2023. Catch all the trash fish. I love it.
And I don't know. I don't know if bluegill are considered a sport fish or a trash fish. That's a good question. I know crappie are sport fish, but there's a bunch of fish out there that don't get the love they should. That's for sure. Yeah. That fight. That's what I'm looking for mostly is the fight.
Yeah, I'm not saying bluegill are trash fish. I don't think many people would say that, but I just, if I catch a fish, I'm stoked. But so I saw that you went to the Italian Alps to catch trout. What was that like? Because I've never fished outside the United States. I've hardly been outside the United States as is. So like, what was that experience like? Because that's like two of your favorite things put together: travel and fishing. You can't beat it.
Exactly. It was awesome. So it was a blast. So I mentioned my buddy Matt. I have an episode with him on my podcast, which is Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. It's one of the earliest episodes, so maybe in the first 10 episodes or so, if you're interested. But he's kind of my fishing buddy and dare I say fishing mentor, and super fishy dude. And he's a fishing guide, fly fishing guide, and all over the world. And anyway, so he put me in contact with this guy named Paolo in Madrid. And I was going to Italy just a vacation with my girlfriend. We went there for 10 days. And one of the things I have with my girlfriend, with Leah, is if we go somewhere for like more than 4 days, I want to fish at least one day or like an afternoon of fishing it. And it's kind of like my, like, hey, if we're doing a long vacation, let's pencil in some fishing time.
100% fair.
Yes, exactly. So this was that. And so my buddy, Matt, put me in contact with this guy, Paolo, who, check him out on Instagram. I forget his last name, but, he makes, tails, these wiggle tails for fly fishing that the fly tyers use in their flies. And anyway, he's a guy based out of Madrid, Spain. So we hooked up with him and was a super nice guy. Picked us up in the morning and took us from downtown Madrid, Italy. Downtown, is Madrid Italy or Spain? What am I talking about here?
Madrid is Spain. Italy is Italy.
Milan. Thank you. That's the one I'm looking for. Milan. We were in Milan, and yeah, so he picked us up in downtown Milan and drove us like 2 hours up into the Italian Alps, and it was just a day fishing thing, and it was amazing, man. It was like the most picturesque, like really clear glacial runoff water, like really big, like drops and pools. And in this particular area, he was mad at us when we said this, but Leah was like, yeah, it like reminds me of a little Swiss village or like a Swiss mountain town. He was like, oh, no, this is not Switzerland. This is the Italian Alps. And, but it was beautiful. It was like you were in like a little village. Like in the morning, we started off, in like a little cafe and got like a croissant and an espresso and just in
very
like this,
Italian.
Yes, exactly. And it was like a tiny little, like just village in the mountains, and just super beautiful. And so we were fly fishing for, all different kinds of trout, but the main one that they're known for there, which is, it's only in a very small section of the world, some of the Scandinavian countries and then Italy, is marble trout. And so I caught rainbows, a couple browns, and then I caught one marble trout, and marbles get bigger, than both brown and rainbows. I didn't get a massive marble, but, caught one of them, which is what we were there for. And yeah, it was awesome. It was, we were nymphing, throughout the pools, kind of Euro nymphing, which was a different technique for me that I was trying to learn, but, it was awesome and super, super pretty too, was kind of one of the takeaways.
I could imagine being in the Italian Alps would be pretty damn beautiful.
Yeah.
If I had to guess,
exactly.
It's no Ohio, but what can you say? So as someone who is not afraid to admit that I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, what I hear all this shit about fly fishing and I'm learning, so I'm 100% ignorant on it, and I will learn it eventually. But what is Euro nymphing? Because I've been hearing that a lot. When you talk about trout, you talk about nymphing, and then they talk about, well, today I Euro nymphed. I'm like, well, okay, what's that mean?
Yeah. So, again, I'm no pro either, but from my understanding of it, so it's a little different setup. It's a longer rod. I want to say, I forget how long the rod is you use, but it's a longer rod, and you are using a heavier jig. Essentially, it's a jig, like almost like a lighter version of what you would use for walleye fishing. And I guess from my perspective, the big difference is when you're Euro nymphing, you're not really casting because you have that weighted jig essentially on it. You're kind of like flinging it out and just like letting it drift in the current, and your line is always just barely taut so that you can feel any little nick that comes along. And something different about the leaders, but generally that's basically my biggest takeaway, was that it's a longer rod. You don't cast it, and it's basically like a fly rod with a light jig on it.
For me, when people talk about fly fishing, I'm doing like the like metric conversion equivalent of like American to European countries, but in fishing terms. I'm like, what does this mean in spin fishing, and why is it the same thing? So it sounds like they're just like flipping jigs, like if you're bass fishing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's pretty much what it is. Yeah, it's like flipping jigs with a fly rod. Is pretty much exactly what it is. That's a good way to describe it.
My takeaway so far with fly fishing is like, let's make everything super complicated sounding and add like 500 extra things to everything to do the same thing that you would just do with a spinning rod. That's my takeaway. And people will hate me for that.
No, you're not wrong. It's one of my it's one of the problems with fly fishing, but it's good and bad. But fly fishing is king of. I love to fly fish, and there's nothing better, I think, than getting in the flow of a beautiful cast, laying down some line and like feeling the take of a fish on the fly and then feeling him run and fighting him on the fly. I think it is superior than spin fishing, doing the same thing on a spin rod. But I still fish spinning like 80% of the time, and fly fishing they can be such snobs, you know. It's like they're stuck in, they can often be stuck in their ways. Like I worked in a fly shop for two summers in Montana, and 80% of the people are great, but you know, the trout snobs, it's like, oh, they're only going to go out if it's dry fly fishing and it's absolutely, conditions are absolutely perfect, and a fish caught any other way is not, doesn't count. It's like, get out of here with that.
Dude, I was in Oklahoma, and we were fly fishing for trout. It was the first time I'd ever gone fly fishing, and there were just everybody head to toe with Sims and whatever, probably like $700 fly rods. I'm out there just like rocking some shit off Amazon I found that I was like, I'm going to see if I can fit it in my bag to take on this trip. And I was like, man, I suck at casting, but all the rest of these people suck at casting too. And nobody's catching shit. Not a single person we saw that day caught anything. And I was kind of laughing internally, which I was just as frustrated because I get like super into stuff when I'm doing it. If I'm fishing, dude, it could be 5 hours go by and I had no clue because I'm just so into it. And it's funny. The next day we hired a guide and we went out and just power fished for him. And the fly fishermen looked at us like we were the scum of the earth, and it was hilarious because we reeled in limits in like literally 20 minutes each. There was three of us, and they looked at us like we were the literal biggest pieces of shit. It was fun.
I know what you mean. It's because they're jelly.
Yeah, but I don't want to talk shit about them. I am now a fly fisherman myself, and I'm just not that pretentious. But that doesn't
mean you have to be snob.
Yeah, maybe I will. Maybe I'll just become a giant snobby fly fisherman.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I'm just joking.
I also like handline fishing. And when I was in Montana, I would go out with my buddies and we'd be fly fishing. And then like the last maybe hour, 2 hours, I had a coffee mug, and I had a bunch of like 8-pound test wrapped around the coffee mug. And I would just put on a little spinner, a little MEPS, I guess, size 3, size 4 MEPS. And whenever we came to a nice pool, I would just, handline fish. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but
yeah,
toss the line out. And, dude, I would go with one buddies one summer, and every time it was like the running joke. It was like the hand line would always catch the biggest fish. It's like biggest fish of the night came on the coffee mug. Meanwhile, there's probably like a couple grand worth of, rods, reels, flies. And yeah, the old hand line, MEPS running through a hole would always produce the biggest fish.
I saw something. I said I was going to convert to this style of fishing. It was a beer koozie that literally would just had like a thing around it, like essentially hand lining, where you could wrap line. And the dude's like drinking the beer, standing in the ocean, like up to his waist, and he's just throwing line out, catching fish. It's like, that's the purest form of fishing right there, baby. Drinking beer, waist deep in the ocean, catching whatever the hell eats it while you're standing there holding beer. That's my
language.
That's my style right there. That's redneck fishing, baby.
Yeah.
Also, ice fishing. I would have to say probably my top 2 types of fishing that I love. Well, ice fishing is one of the top 2. I haven't decided yet. Absolutely love ice fishing.
Oh man, it's I'm right there with you. It's right up there. I think it's a 1B for me. 1A is like, traveling down a river and throwing top water for whatever's going to hammer it. And 1B is probably ice fishing, man. People do not get it. Even my buddy Matt, who I've mentioned several times this podcast, I think he's because he's a Nancy for the cold, but he claims he doesn't like ice fishing. I'm like, you just don't get it. It's the best. You're standing on a frozen lake chasing fish. Like what's cooler than that?
Yeah. And you're sitting in a tent and drinking beer. Like, it's dangerous. It's fun. You sometimes don't catch any fish. You sometimes catch a shitload of fish. And you talk about fighting a bluegill on a tiny rod. I don't even know what you would like consider those rods, like ultra mega light. Ice fishing rods are the goofiest thing I've ever seen, and I absolutely love them. And
baby rods.
Yeah, like the first time I ever got one, like I'm not a small guy, and it looked like I was holding a toy, and I was like, "You've got to be shitting me!" And I was like, "This is the best thing ever." Just sitting in a tent fishing. So it's funny because there's a dichotomy there too. Because when I fish, I like to be mobile. I like to be in a kayak, or I'm like walking riverbanks, I just like to move. I'm not a very stationary person in general. But then ice fishing is just as fun, but you don't move hardly at all, which is weird. Why? I don't understand why I like it so much. There should be no reason that I like it that much.
I think for me, there's multiple things. One is that there's something nice and cool to just like putting yourself in the elements, like there's something good to know, feels good knowing like it's gnarly out here. It's freezing. It's cold. The wind's blowing. I'm standing on a frozen lake. Really shouldn't probably be out here. Most people are sitting at home on the couch, but I'm going to go catch some fish. And I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to catch a tank, I'm going to catch a pig. And
on a little baby rod.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that plays a part into it. And then also I just love, so I do like that part, but I also just love the same thing as fishing open water, like the challenge of trying to understand where the fish are at and how to catch them. It doesn't stop. It's just like you just have to drill a hole through the ice.
Yeah, I think that is the appeal is putting that knowledge that you got over the course of a year on a big open body of water, taking that into the winter and seeing if you still got it. I think that is the appeal, to be completely honest. I don't know what else it would be, because you would think it would be boring, but it's not. It's the greatest. So you've also, Jesus, like, and then you fished in the Amazon. What the hell is that like? That's like mystery fishing to me. That seems like there's shit down there that can kill you. There's a bunch of bugs.
Yeah, it was mystery fishing to me too. Yeah, it was mystery fishing to me too. It was awesome. So it was a few years ago now, 2 years ago, I think. That was a fly fishing. It wasn't fly fishing only, but it was probably like 80 or 90% fly fishing. And it was to northern Brazil, and just south of Suriname, the country of Suriname. And on a tributary of the Amazon. And it was awesome, man. It was 7 days fishing, and the main target was peacock bass on the fly, which, crazy strong fish, especially like that might be one of the strongest freshwater fish and hardest fighting freshwater fish that I've come across. Like they are like, holy cow, man. Funny enough, not funny, but I broke, I'm trying to remember now. I think I broke 2 or 3 rods on that trip from fish. Like, yes. And I think I replaced them, but I'm trying to remember now. But like going under the boat, one of them snapped, and I forget how I broke the other ones, but super strong, crazy strong fish. And then bunch of piranhas. Piranhas were like all over the place. And they were like the trash fish that they would take your flies and like, just completely demolish them. You'd come back after a piranha hit it, and like the whole back half of the fly, which was all supposed to be hairs and tail, just completely razor, sharpened, and all you were left with was a bare hook. Jeez.
They are as bad as they say. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's crazy. And then the other, awesome one that I, really liked fishing for down there is they have several different species of wild crazy catfish. And they have some red tail catfish, which are really cool looking. They have one that looks like a leopard. Literally it looks like a catfish, like leopard print. But instead of circles, it's kind of like lined.
Weird.
Pretty wild. And then the one catfish that I caught is called the Pirabi, I believe is how you say it. Pirabi.
Okay.
And they get massive. And the one I caught was on some cut bait was 150 pounds about. It took 3 of us to lift it up. And yeah, man, it was insane. I had one on earlier. We just are in this like little, boat, not like a Lund or anything. It's got, it's just like a little aluminum boat, and tiny little thing in the middle of nowhere on this tributary in the middle of Brazil on this native territory. And, catching, tossing out cut bait, and I hooked one the first time and fought it for like 20 minutes. And I forget how it got off, but, it got off. I think I was like passing the rod or like stepping over somebody or something, and it popped off and was just like absolutely devastated. It was me, one other guy, and then the guide who was like one of the native tribesmen from this area. And we were all just like devastated that night, like telling stories around the table, like, that was the biggest fish of my life and we lost it. And so we went back the next day to the same hole, and that's when I hooked the one that we landed. We had like a game plan. The first day when we went there, it was like, let's see what's here. We'll sit for a little bit, and we hooked into it, and then it was like all hell broke loose. And the second day, we had more of a game plan. So we decided, okay, when we hook into a big one, if we get into one, we're going to fire up the boat and chase it a little bit with the boat, because last time we were anchored and the fish ran, and it was just like off. And so, we fired up the boat and we chased it down a little bit and fought it for maybe like a half hour or so, and got it to shore. And just like an absolutely behemoth of a catfish. It was pretty wild.
That's nuts. It sounds like I got a buddy who went and caught those Wells catfish over, I think it's in Spain. It's a pretty similar experience, like just the hugest fish. I can't imagine what it's like to catch a fish that big. I hope I get to find out someday. But the closest thing I've been is a black tip shark, and it wasn't even that big. And that thing, it felt like I was reeling in 100 pounds. It was just...
I believe it. I mean, sharks, I've never caught a shark, but I'd like to. That sounds sick. I mean, saltwater too is a different animal. I mean, saltwater fish are just like, it's hard to compare to freshwater.
Yeah, that was the only time I've fought a fish like that, and that's probably only the third time I've ever fished saltwater, which I love. I wish I lived near saltwater, but I live near the biggest freshwater lakes, which is it's pretty cool too. So back to this region. So muskie and pike are two fish that I really, really want to catch. I've caught a pike before. Wasn't anything massive, but they are just strange fish. And I know muskie are a pain in the ass to catch. So we'll start there. Muskie, you caught some muskie. What's that experience like? Because I hear it just wears your ass out.
So two things. I'll intertwine them. I got I love pike, man. I love pike. I think that is probably my favorite overall species to fish, just due to the abundance, how aggressive they are. Like, they're relatively easy to catch, strong, mean, sharp teeth. Like pretty much in any waterway other than if there's muskie. They're the alpha dogs, alpha predator. And again, just get a terribly bad rap. Seems like people are coming around to them a little more now, but yeah, pike fishing. I love pike fishing and muskie fishing too. But your question about muskie, muskie fishing can be tough, and you got to know where you're targeting. I feel like pike, at least around me, they're everywhere. So it's like anytime I'm smallmouth fishing or just out and about, I could run into a pike. But muskie, I'm generally more targeting an area where I know muskie live. And yeah, the whole muskie thing, I'm a little torn on it. I love going out and after them. However, because I love the chase and the hunt. However, I will say this, for the size of the muskie, typically when you catch muskie, they're around the boat. Not always, but they're typically pretty close to the boat, which is a plus and a minus because you get to see them. And typically you can see them inhale your bait, which is awesome. But that means that the fight's usually not that long. Like if you hook them right by the boat, it's like you're a net guy there, and you're usually trying to net them like as soon as possible. Now, if you catch them out a ways from the boat on a cast, there is more of a fight involved. But I mean, obviously, the amazing part about muskie is just their size. Like pike get big, but muskie, I mean, 50, 60 inches they can get up to, and just like, absolutely behemoths.
I just think they look super cool too. They're just so camouflaged, and they're a beautiful fish. And one of the things I really want to, and I know I'm probably in the minority here, but I really want to catch some pike and eat them just to see what they taste like, because I've heard it's amazing fish to eat. And people often say that a lot of people won't eat them because they have a lot of bones. They're really thin bones. And I mean, I just ate a ton of trout over the last few weeks because they do trout releases here in some of the local reservoirs. And I mean, if you're on them, and you're limiting out and catching trout and eating trout. And they're bony as shit too, and they're a pain in the ass to eat. If you're just like cutting their head off and gutting them and cooking them like that, I don't know. I feel like people just like to make a lot of excuses to not have to do any work to eat a fish when it's 100%.
Pike's good. It's it definitely is more fishy, and depending on the water temperature, when you get a little warmer into the summer, they can get a little yellow and a little mushier, but they're still good, man. I know people who, there's several different ways to do it, right? There is ways to fillet them and take out the Y bones, which are those little bones that people complain about. I also, when I was in South Dakota, it was really common. People would pickle them. They would like cube them and pickle the meat, and then the bones disintegrate in the vinegar or the pickling process. But I always just fillet them and cook them up that way. I don't keep them that often, but if I'm on a camping trip or something and we catch one, we'll keep them. And yeah, they're great. They're not it's not as good as walleye, I don't think, but it ain't that far behind it. Yeah.
I've run into a lot of misconceptions about wild game that I just don't agree with. I mean, I've eaten a lot of weird shit, and most of it tastes totally fine. I mean, people are so
used. What's the weirdest thing you've eaten?
We ate merganser, which people say is trash, and I was like, this just tastes delicious. It's like a low grade steak, which is still good. But
exactly,
people are so used to eating this highly processed, super fatty, choice food like beef, that they want it to taste like this, or chicken has pretty much no flavor at all, and they expect that. It's like, if you just let it taste like what it tastes like, it's not bad. Or I found that people just suck at cooking and they don't know how to cook anything, which is also a problem.
It's crazy how going back not that far, most of our grandparents probably, and definitely one generation past that, all had game in their diets rabbits, turtle, especially around here. Like I say that only because I know of stories of like my grandparents, cooking turtle and stuff, but turtle soup, but deer, like all that stuff, like that was just a part of life. And now it's just, it's kind of disappeared.
Hey, what's up, everyone? James Appleton here, co-founder of Absolute Aid. Welcome to the Seek to Do More program. This program will help you help yourself by developing the daily habits that will elevate your entire life. Over the next 30 days, you'll complete the doers list every single day. And the doers list includes 1, do something physical. 2, follow and stick to your diet of choice. 3, read a real book. 4, further your education on purpose. 5, dedicate time to your spiritual life. And 6, dedicate time to your hobbies. So if you're ready to take a structured, proven approach to build the daily habits that will allow you to get the most out of yourself, your time, and your life every single day, the Seek to Do More program is your blueprint. So make a choice, commit to yourself, sign up below, and let's get started.
My grandma asked me to catch carp all the time and smoke them because she used to eat that all the time, and she loves it. I'm like, if I ever come across any, I'll keep them for you and I'll smoke them for you, but I'll try it. If it sucks, I won't eat it anymore. But I have to assume if she says it's good, that at some point it's probably not that bad. And I heard, speaking of carp, I heard they're like a son of a bitch to fly fish for, and people absolutely love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they are really tough and really picky and really smart to fly fish. I've fished for them before, and yeah, they're tough. And the other thing about carp is it's the #1 game species in Europe.
I believe that. I just read that actually.
Yeah, it's huge, and it's so funny. Again, another case of rough or trash fish here in the U.S. Like nobody fishes for carp. But dude, you want to talk about a fight? That's another freshwater fish that you put a worm on and throw it into a pack of carp. Like you better buckle up and set your drag because that thing's going to be screaming. That's fun.
Yeah. So let's switch gears here to the other side of your life that consumes the other half, I would assume, is travel adventure. So you got a pretty extensive list of backpacking and kayaking or canoeing. So let's start with the Grand Canyon. You raft the Grand Canyon. Is that true that I have the impression that there's like a long wait list on that to do something like that? Yeah,
there's a lottery system, and I think they're changing how they do it. But yeah, there's a lottery system and a super long waiting process. Pain in the butt. How it worked when I got it was one of my buddies applied for it, and he randomly got the permit on his first try. And it was like he drew it 2 years before the launch date. So yeah, he knew he reached out 2 years before it went. He was like, "Hey, I have this permit. If you want to go 2 years from now." I'm like, and of course it actually worked out because 2 years is long enough where you're like, "Oh yeah, I'll make that happen 2 years from now." Like I got nothing in the calendar then.
Yeah. 2 years. And, I don't even know what's going on in 2 days.
Yeah, exactly. So I said, yeah. And then it just happened to work out, when the time came that I, could make it work. And absolutely amazing trip, man. I've done a lot of cool trips, and that one could be #1 or right up there. It's just unbelievably spectacular. So it was the other cool thing about it. A lot of the trips that I've done as far as the wilderness stuff is relatively solo. It's either me solo, like when I canoed the Mississippi River solo. I did the Yukon River, which was 70 days up in Alaska. That was with one other guy. So a lot of the wilderness trips are like small, but the Grand Canyon, it's a whitewater rafting trip. So these things are like barges, and it's a big group atmosphere, which is really awesome. Mm-hmm. So it was, it was 20 something days. I want to say it was like 23 days or something. And a group of 16 of us. And it was all friends of my buddy Rob, who was from Crested Butte, Colorado, and so had a awesome collection of guides and different outdoorsmen and women. And yeah, just an awesome trip. Crazy whitewater, crazy big whitewater. The most spectacular red canyons in the world. So steep canyons, and yeah, you just feel so small, and it feels like you're, I don't know, in some place really special. You can tell,
Yeah. So the Yukon, that seems like it would probably be the hairiest of the trips just because of where you are. Was that relative? I mean, with Alaska, I'd have to assume it's relatively or super remote most of the time. So how do you prepare for something like that logistically? Because a lot of even the through hiking shit that people do here in the States, comparatively, it's low risk because if anything happens, you're only a day away from, I mean, it's not like true wilderness like Alaska is. So it's kind of like playing pioneer, in my opinion, which I can talk shit because I've done it. So I'm not really concerned about what people think about it. And I know for a fact that, especially the Appalachian Trail, I can speak on. It's if anything happened, I mean, realistically, I'm a mile or two from a road, probably. So,
yeah, so the way it came about, so the Yukon River, I canoed it. The length of it is, again, 70 days, and that was with one other guy. That was in 2018. And the year before that, in 2017, I did a solo canoe trip down the length of the Mississippi River. And that trip, they're kind of intertwined, so I'll just go that way. But that trip was, the Mississippi was like a lifelong dream of mine. I'd always wanted to do this long, crazy river trip. And I took a leave of absence from my work at the, at the radio station that I was working at the time in South Dakota, and was like, hey, I want to do this. This is a dream of mine. I'm going to do this. If you'll have me back after I do this trip, I'd love to come back. And it worked out that they said yes. So I did this trip, and it ended up taking me 103 days solo down the Mississippi. And then after that, when I was on that river trip, maybe 60 or 80 days in, something like that, I was texting one of my buddies, and I was like, man, this is the life. I'm just floating in a canoe on the Mississippi. This is amazing. We got to do another big river. And I convinced him to join me. And then, the next year I went up to the Yukon and did that one with him. So, I kind of had a better understanding of what it would take after doing the Mississippi the year before, and kind of upping the ante a little bit to the wilderness of the Yukon. But, really raw and remote. I mean, doesn't really get much more remote as far as the United States goes. There's times there where you're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles from the nearest road. Only option is, a flight from a village not close,
Yeah. And so on that trip, did you have to carry a high powered rifle or anything? Because I know grizzly bears are a real issue in Alaska, they're a real issue anywhere that they are, but they're much less numbers from what I understand in the lower 48, whereas Alaska is a lot more wild, and they're probably not scared of you at all.
Yeah, they're no joke up there, especially the interior brown bears. They're a little more feisty because they don't have all that seafood that they do on the coast. But no, we didn't. We thought about it, and I would have brought I had a Mariner, which is I forget who makes it. It's 12 gauge. It's a short 12 gauge. I think it's not Mossberg. But anyway, it's a short 12 gauge, essentially for one of the purposes is for bear protection. And I had that, but I ended up not bringing it because we started in Canada, and the first maybe 20 or 30 days were in Canada, and super strict with weapons there. Mm-hmm. So that was an absolute no-go. It was funny, actually, thinking back to it. I was trying to figure out what we would do. And we ended up just taking bear spray. We had bear spray and never used it. It was fine, but had a lot of bear encounters and a lot of bear sign, but never used the bear spray. But when I was trying to figure out if I was going to take the gun or not, I remember calling up to the RMCP, the Royal Mounted Police, and I it took me a while to get to somebody like kind of high up for the Yukon territory. And finally I got to him. I was like, hey, I'd like to bring a 12 gauge up there for bear protection. And I kind of explained to him the situation, like, hey, I'm paddling the Yukon. This is what's going on. Thinking in my head, like maybe he would understand because of like this, extreme remoteness. Meanwhile, it's just his everyday life up there,
Yeah.
And he's like, excuse me, buddy. Like, nobody can have a gun up here. He's like, he's like, even if you're a citizen, he's like, you have to have it registered, and it takes years to register a weapon, blah, blah, blah. He was like, absolutely not. You will not be able to take that. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, well, I guess that ends that discussion. So yeah.
Sounds like they need to learn how to party, baby.
Yeah, that's what I thought, man. And again, it was one of those things where it was like, I thought explaining the situation, like, yeah, we're going on this, remote trip, but it was like, no, you idiot. You can't bring a gun into Canada.
Like, can I borrow one at least? Come on, bro. Help me out.
I know. But yeah, we took bear spray and ended up being all good. But, yeah. And another kind of funny anecdote with that is we, on the first, going into the trip in that Yukon trip, my buddy and I were like, okay, if we see any sign, if we stop for camp and we see any sign, like any bear, moose, wolf signs, scat, prints, anything like that, like we'll just move on. We'll just hop in the boat and go to the next site. No big deal. And then we got 5 or 10 days in before we realized that plan was not going to work. It was like there was sign everywhere. Yeah. It was like everywhere we stopped was moose and bear tracks. It was like by midway through the trip, I was like setting up my tent on bear tracks.
What was the most difficult part of that trip?
The Yukon. I put it with an asterisk because I loved it, and I was just like doing what I love. So it was, none of it was terrible necessarily, but the most difficult part probably was the last 2 weeks or so. The weather was terrible. Fall was blowing in up there. It was really windy, rainy. We never saw the sun for 2 weeks. And just cold, tough paddling conditions, windy, and putting on wet socks in the morning, it's one of those things where it doesn't matter how good your rain gear is. You could have had, the nicest rain gear in the world, unless you were in a dry suit, it was soaking through, yeah. It was how it goes when it starts pouring and your coat is touching the shirt underneath, and then it just seeps through onto your shirt, and you're like, what the heck? I'm wearing total rain gear, but my clothes underneath are just soaked. And yeah.
We got to the point on the Appalachian Trail where during the warm months, like June, July, August, September even, we just didn't even wear rain gear, because at that point you're just like, dude, it works for 10 minutes. And then one little part leaks or gets through and it's over. You're just soaked. And then if you don't get wet, if it does its job, you're soaked from the inside out because you're hiking up mountains and you're sweating your ass off. So yeah. I would say rain gear is essentially useless unless you're sitting still or you're just running around camp. But if you're doing an activity in the rain, you're fucked. There's no other, it's useless.
You're spending all day. Yeah.
And they have vents and all this fancy crap that they put on them. It's just a marketing selling point because it doesn't do a goddamn thing.
I hear you. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. So that was tough, and just getting soaked. And I remember stopping a couple times, and we'd stop in the middle of the day and just have to run sprints and do jumping jacks, just to warm up. That's never fun being cold,
Yeah. This might be a stupid question. Did you do any fishing on that trip, or was it a strict paddle and just grunt it out kind of thing?
My biggest regret on both of those trips was not spending more time fishing. It was kind of more just grind it out. wake up, paddle, wake up, breakfast, coffee, paddle, get up, set up camp, go to bed, dinner, bed, repeat.
Yeah.
It
becomes a blur.
Bit. Yeah, exactly. And you just get in a groove. And also on the Yukon, on the Mississippi, I don't have as much, many excuses, but, on the Yukon, I was with my buddy Jackson, who wasn't really much of a fisherman. So it's hard to like stop somebody and be like, all right, I'm going to sit here for 2 hours while you twiddle your thumb.
Yeah.
But with that being said, tons of salmon on that trip. It's like, salmon heaven up there. And so we would run into lots of native villages we'd stop into. They'd give us salmon strips, canned salmon fillets. And then every once in a while, we'd run into some like native fishermen, and they would just like throw a whole salmon in our boat. Like, you want to fish? We're like, yeah, bring it in. And just, literally just a whole, salmon, uncleaned, and we'd fillet it on the shore and have fresh salmon for dinner. Is so good.
Does not get any better than that. I think every person that ever lives that enjoys fishing, no matter how much they get to fish, will be on their deathbed said, man, I wish I would have spent more time fishing. Regardless of the scenario. I know I will. I'll be
better.
Yeah. I'll be on there. I'll be on my deathbed, like just coming off the most epic fishing trip of my life. I'll be like, I wish I would have fished more. And then I'll die. And then people will be like, this guy's an idiot.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean too. Yeah. Even like you said, even coming off like a big trip. It's like, I ate lunch. I shouldn't have eaten lunch. I could have been casting.
Yeah. Do you get on those long distance trips? Do you get that anxiousness of like, I know I should be moving right now, but you also get so exhausted to the point where you're like, I kind of just want to also die right now? Or are you more chill on those kind of trips?
I'm more chill, honestly. The Mississippi, it was awesome because I was just at my own pace. It was solo, and it took me 103 days to go like 2,300 some miles from northern Minnesota down, straight down through to the Gulf of Mexico. And I was just taking it easy. I say that looking back, in the moments there was terrible days where you're like just long and tired and wiped and beat. But those tend to fade as time passes, right?
Yeah. Well, as you do it more, you get used to that slower pace of life, and then you just kind of accept it. And then your muscles get used to that monotonous, like paddle. The longest I've done was 4 days on a river, and we were doing like 40 plus miles a day on most of the days. And I mean, it was just brutal, but I knew I only had 4 days, so I could push it a little bit. Like, it wasn't a big deal. Those are huge days.
In a kayak?
In a kayak. We all were kayaking. So it was tough, but it wasn't that tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you're doing 2,000 plus miles, I'm assuming the Maumee, I don't know what time of year you did it, but I would assume it moves kind of fast, and then there's big, giant, open, wide spaces where it slows down a little bit, and it's the closer you get to the ocean, the slower it gets. That would be my assumption, but then again, I have no idea.
Pretty spot on. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly. It picks up a little bit as you go, but there's always generally a current. So there's I forget how many. I want to say there's somewhere around 30. Maybe I could be wrong. Somewhere around 30 lock and dams on the Mississippi, on the upper Mississippi. So they run from Minneapolis all the way to St. Louis, and in those sections, it basically makes like a big lake. They call them pools. That section, the current can change. There's usually current right down after the dam, and then it slows as you get towards the next dam. And then from St. Louis all the way down to past New Orleans to the Gulf is all free flowing. So it's just a big, wide open river, not one single dam. And it gets going, and depending on the year and the water flow, you could be cooking a little bit. But I would say, I don't know, typically when I'm canoeing, all things equal, just as a general rule of thumb, I'm usually traveling like 3 to 4 miles an hour.
Cool. Yeah, I was just in New Orleans, and it's pretty cool down there. I got to see the Mississippi right on the banks, right off like downtown Bourbon Street. And I was there for work, so everybody wants to do the whole like go to Bourbon Street and check all this cool shit. And I was like, all right, whatever. And then I saw the Mississippi. I was like, you guys go do your thing. I'm just gonna stay here and look at it for a while because this is all I care about. Like, you're weird.
It's a big girl down there, isn't it?
Huge, freaking, and it was moving. It was cooking.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So when you hit, at what point do you consider it done? Because the Mississippi, when you look at it on the map through New Orleans, it's like there's just these little blocks where it just keeps going for infinity into the ocean. So when, like, what's the official ending point? Like, were you like the last little chunk and like this is it, or is there like an official end where it meets the ocean?
Everybody's different, and lots of people do different ways to get there. But the way that I did it, and the way that I think makes sense to me at least, is to go to the saltwater, man. It's about 100 miles south of New Orleans, and there's a small town down there. Actually, speaking of fishing, it's one of the sport fishing capitals of the world. Epic fishing, red fishing, tuna, all kinds of stuff there. In Venice, Louisiana is the name of the town. And that's the farthest south that you can drive. So that's the farthest south road access. And then about 20 miles or so, I believe it is, south of there is a town called It's like a little fishing village. Again, no road access, called Port Eads. And just south of Port Eads, there's a jetty, kind of like a rock eddy that runs out. And that's where the fresh water meets the salt water. And that's where you're in the Gulf of Mexico. So yeah, I paddled out into the Gulf after 103 days. And I remember feeling like immediately and just distinctively feeling the difference of like the ocean wave versus like feeling that on my boat versus like the last 100 days of feeling the river and being like, oh yeah, that's the ocean. Like you can just kind of feel the power of it. Kind of crazy.
Awesome. That is super cool. Yeah, it's I'm like that too. When we did the local river here, the Maumee River, we start like a lot. It's called the Fort to Port, and I say this with not a lot of proof, but I don't think that many people have done it just because it's not like a traditionally sporting river that people like recreate on very often because it's just kind of muddy. It's called the Muddy Maumee, and
probably the natives before you, at least for sure.
Yeah, that's about it. But people nowadays don't really recreate on it like that. Like they don't see it as a river you through paddle or anything. So we did it with some friends, and I've had a bunch of episodes I've done about it in the past with people. And it's funny because I'm the same way. We started where the river, before the river starts, before it officially becomes the Maumee River, it's the confluence of the St. Joseph's and St. Mary's River. So we started on, I think it was the St. Joseph's, and we paddled like a mile on that, where then it became the Maumee. And then a lot of people end at this dock in downtown Toledo where it's an easy pull out, but we paddled like an extra couple miles in, like to actually hit Lake Erie itself. And that's where we ended. So I will call anybody else who's done it before getting to there a giant poser. And I'm just not afraid to say that because there's probably like 8 other people who have done it.
I'm not a poser, man.
No, you're not a poser. No, I like that mindset. And at the end of the day, I'm just talking shit. It really doesn't matter because anytime you go on a trip like that, it's like just, if you want to do it, you shouldn't give a shit what anybody else thinks anyways. So I just happen to be a psychopath and I can't live with myself unless I live in the confines of my own stupid made up rules that affect nobody but me. So
I hear you. Yeah. The Mississippi, it's growing. It's still not very popular, but it is growing in popularity. I want to say there's like 20 some or so on average that finish it per year, people. And, lots of folks stop in New Orleans, because, kind of instinctually, I guess you think it seems like at the southern point, like when you hear about it, runs all the way to New Orleans. So some people stop in New Orleans. And then another common one is there's a river called the Atchafalaya, something like that.
Atchafalaya.
Yeah, Atchafalaya. There you go. And it sounds right to me. I always butcher it, and I don't think anybody actually knows when they say they know how to say it. I don't believe them.
Well, we're both from the north, so we definitely are not the people to ask. So
exactly.
Forgive us.
That's for sure. But anyway, that's a small river that shoots off of the Mississippi now. And apparently folks say that that's, I forget if it's, I believe it's like if the locks were removed, that's the way that the river would naturally flow. So that some people say is like the true Mississippi. And so that flows into the Gulf, and that is really, like picturesque, like swamp, wilderness, I guess, like, what do they call it? Bayous and like cypress trees and alligators. And I guess it's really, really pretty. Whereas the section of the Mississippi, the very ending section of the Mississippi from like Baton Rouge to New Orleans and then south to the Gulf is really busy with commercial traffic, lots of barges, lots of big boats. So it can get kind of hairy, but that other Appalachia, offshoot I've heard is really spectacular, but I've never paddled it.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up here, you've done all this cool stuff. You've traveled, hundreds and hundreds of miles on rivers and thousands of miles actually. And you've been all over the world and you fished and caught a lot of badass fish. You've got a lot of cool experiences that 99.999% of the people in the world will never get. And you're not even old yet. So that's pretty cool. And what has that taught you? Like, what's the big takeaway? Like, I know that's really hard because when you do shit like that, you still are just like living your life day to day. So it doesn't seem that like like when I did the AT, it was a big deal, but like, I still have to work a job and like, I just still have to live my day to day life, but you do learn something at the end of the day. What's that big takeaway for you?
Well, a couple things. First, I would say that you're exactly right that, when you list like accomplishments and trips and fish species and all that stuff, when you list it out on a website, like I have a buffalorumber.com or I think you're reading and referencing, or like when you talk about all these stuff that stacks up, it's like, it sounds super impressive, and it is impressive, and it is cool, and it is unique, and I've enjoyed doing all that. But like you said, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's like, that's years, and I'm young, but yeah, it's like years and decades, I guess, or more worth of small trips, a week here, 3 days there, 2 days there, 5 days here. And it just stacks and stacks. And then when you look back, you're like, wow, that is a lot of different, stuff that I've done. And it's just been from a passion of anytime I get free time and a couple extra bucks, I want to go into the woods and check out a beautiful new area with a canoe or backpack and fishing rod. Like, that's what I want to do. So from all that travel and all that stuff, the general takeaway I have is two things. One is that, people are good, and, like people are willing to help you out, and that it's always generally about the people. I do all these trips and we talk about all the fish and all the stuff, but the stories that you remember and that you recall are the people that you shared those times with, and the guy that was standing next to you when you caught that monster fish, and the people who welcomed you in when you were tired and cold and cooked you a meal, or the people that you helped somehow. You always think it's about the mountains and the river and the wilderness, but it's always about the people, man. That's the things that you remember. So that's one of the big takeaways. And then the other takeaway is that you just got to go do it. You got to make it happen. Nobody's going to make things happen for you. Do small things, appreciate the things that are around you. And if you have a goal, or if you have something that you want to do, try your best to make it happen. I was, that bigger stuff. Yeah, it can be tough, and it has to be the right time in your life. I wouldn't be able to do the Mississippi and the Yukon trip now at this point in my life. But when I was young and fresh out of college and, could make things work, I was able to, but you can still always do smaller stuff around, like I said, 2 days here, 3 days there. and you just have to make it a priority. And then pretty soon you end up with a long list of cool places.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with those sentiments. After doing some like big long trips, like you said, in that weird gap between like you get out of college and then you have to do grown up bullshit and pretend like you care about working and all this stuff, you have the time. And I would encourage anybody who's listening, if you do get those breaks, to absolutely go do that. 100%. Go get outside of your comfort zone, because down the road it makes it so much easier. Like earlier in this podcast I talked about, we're going out on this fly trip. None of us know what we're doing. But having that experience of doing all this crazy shit that I've done in the past makes it easier. Like, I'm not intimidated. I know that it's gonna suck a little bit and we might not be successful, but I've already taken that leap so many times into the unknown, where the unknown isn't so scary anymore. And it translates into your day-to-day life. You take these risks at work and you realize that everyone's just as clueless or, nervous about a decision as you. And you can be like, well, nobody else is going to like make this happen. So if I do it, it's over with. And I think it just makes you not scared. And I'm not like a very outgoing person in general. Like, I'm pretty quiet outside of the podcast. I just like on here, I'm in my own little box and I talk to people that are usually on the same page as me. So it's like, I'm comfortable, but outside of here, I don't really go and talk to people and stuff. But I think it just gives you this sense of, you understand that the world's big, but it's not that scary. It's like,
absolutely,
you can still go do all this stuff regardless of what the news says or whatever. And, like you hear about everything's now the most dangerous thing ever. And I'm like, well, maybe, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I'm pretty sure studies are saying that it's safer now than in like the 70s when kids were running around doing whatever they wanted. So, it's also made me have a little bit more of a bullshit detector, because I've like lived in the real world and not in the social media world. So I don't know. I think it's really important, and what you're doing is really cool. And before we wrap up, man, first off, I want to say you had me on your podcast. So I would encourage anybody listening to go check that out if they haven't already, Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. And then how can people find you? I know your social media and your website and all of that stuff, so that they can head over there and check your stuff out, because it's great stuff.
Yeah, you bet, man. Yeah, check it out. The podcast, Buffalo Roamer Outdoors, that's available wherever you're listening to this one now. So go subscribe. I got a lot of good feedback about your episode and enjoyed talking with you. So yeah, check that out. BuffaloRoamer.com is the website. I guide. So I'm a farmer here in Northern Illinois. That's what I do full time. But I also do guided backcountry canoe trips. So I got one coming up in May here. We're going to Moab, Utah, that I'm really looking forward to. It's just like a week and a half away. But yeah, if you're interested in joining a guided epic backcountry canoe trip somewhere, check out BuffaloRoamer.com. I got stuff up there. And then I also have a bunch of fishing blogs. I try and write about a lot of the fishing trips. The Amazon trip I got some writing on, and a couple muskie trips. And then social media, just at Buffalo Roamer or at Buffalo_Roamer is the Instagram. I'm most active on Instagram and Facebook. But yeah, check it out. And yeah, appreciate talking with you, man. It's always good connecting with somebody and, someone who's easy talking,
All right. Well, thanks very much, dude. We'll wrap it up. Hey, thanks for listening to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. If you're getting anything out of this, if you're learning something, if it's helped you in any way, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. Throw me $1, throw me $2. We greatly appreciate it. Just using it to keep this ship afloat. So thank you very much.